In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel in Susa, in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns, standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged towards the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came toward the 2-horned ram, and I had seen standing beside the canal, and charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up towards the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did and was thrown to the ground. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, "How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled, the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people?" He said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man, and I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, "Gabriel, tell the man the meaning of the vision." As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. "Son of man," he said to me, "understand that the vision concerns the time of the end." While he was speaking to me, I was in deep sleep, with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, "I am going to tell you what will happen later in time, in the time of wrath, because of the vision concerns the appointment time of the end. The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The 4 horns that replaced the one that was broken off represents 4 kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper. He will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given to you is true. But seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future." I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up, went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding.
Thank you, Jane. You may not have noticed, but this week there was an election on the 5th of November, a very important election where one country set out to elect its president. You know, over 9,000 people cast their ballots in that election, and the results are still being finalized, and it looks like President Sarangal Whips Jr. Will have the majority. I am, of course, talking about the country of Palau in the South Pacific region. You all knew that, right? 2024 has been called the year of elections. According to Wikipedia, over 90 countries are electing someone to office, of a high office in their country this year. So that affects over half the population of the world. 8 of the 10 countries involved are those with the highest populations, and it includes some of the most influential and populated countries around the world. So India, Brazil, Russia, and ourselves in the UK. We had our one on Independence Day, funnily enough. Are there any others? Am I missing any? Oh yeah, America. That's the one. Of course, they had their election on the same day, 5th of November, interestingly on bonfire night, to appoint Donald Trump. There is every possibility that come 2025, the world could look like a very different place. Well, today's chapter in Daniel is all about shifting governments. And the very reason this chapter is here is to forewarn Daniel and God's people of how the world's superpowers are going to shift in his time. And as the saying goes, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So in other words, knowing those who are in power and how it will all shift, knowing that there will be negative impacts on us, upon believers, means that we can be better prepared to face opposition. That even when we're facing horrific events, that we can do so without being caught by surprise. Well, with this chapter, there are strong parallels with chapter 7, the previous chapter. But whereas with chapter 7, there's some debate over exactly which 4 kingdoms are being represented, these 2 kingdoms in this chapter are very clearly explained. So there's no debate over that. We're in the reign of Belshazzar, who was the king of Babylon. He was the one who saw God's hand writing on a wall. So we're in the year around 548 BC, 2 years after the previous vision. Daniel was probably in Babylon, but in his vision he sees himself in Susa. So he was probably in what is modern-day Iraq, but he sees himself in what is now modern-day Iran, so 200 miles east from where he is. And in his vision, he sees a ram with 2 horns. And we don't need to guess what's going on, because verse 20 tells us it's the Median and Persian kings or kingdoms. Each one has a horn, and one of the horns is bigger, which represents the bigger power involved, which was Persia, because they were dominant. And in his vision, this Medo-Persian ram it sweeps in fast in all directions, taking over the whole world, which is exactly what happened at the end of Belshazzar's time as king. Remember how in chapter 5 of Daniel, he was partying one night and the Persian army was camped outside, and that very night they conquered Babylon. They claimed not just Babylon, but the whole empire. But then Daniel's dream is interrupted by this goat. So we've got the ram with 2 horns, and then this goat comes in. The goat moves so fast it doesn't even touch the ground, and it has 1 prominent horn. Verse 21 tells us that this goat is Greece. Again, no need to speculate. The large horn is its first king, not named in the chapter, but that was Alexander the Great. And the Greek goat charges at the Medo-Persian ram, knocks it to the ground, destroys it, and that's exactly what Alexander the Great did. He swept in across the whole of the known world and destroyed all of the kings in his way, all of the other empires. He took control of them, just like all of the kings before him. He's intent on global conquest. He wants to be the next global superpower. So having captured Babylon, he then captured Susa. And you can read about this you read about it on Wikipedia, but in other, proper history books, you can read about them there. He captured Susa, and that finished off the Medo-Persian Empire, which is presumably why Daniel, though in Babylon, sees himself as in Susa. The next thing that happens is the goat's big horn is snapped off. And Alexander the Great, he died at a young age, in 32, in Babylon, very shortly after all of his conquering that he did. And that was the year 323. So this is almost 200 years after Daniel's vision. These events actually happened in history. So Alexander the Great dies, and in place of that one horn that is snapped off, 4 more horns rise up in its place. And that's because after Alexander the Great's death, the empire then became distributed to 4 of his generals who governed 4 different regions within the Greek Empire. Again, you can look that up in history books. We haven't finished yet with the vision, but for now, let's just pause and think about the significance of what's happened so far. The first key to this is that Jesus will outlast all human powers. Babylon doesn't last. The Persian Empire doesn't last. Even Greece's conquering king doesn't live on. He is the horn that gets snapped off. The Greek Empire splits into 4. And since that time, since the Greek Empire, we've had all kinds of other empires across the world throughout history, haven't we? We've had the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the caliphates of Islam, the dynasties of China. We've even had the British Empire that has come and gone, reaching its peak around 100 years ago. And today it's typically thought that the most powerful countries in the world, the most influential countries in the world, it's the USA is thought to be the most powerful, then followed by China and Russia. But how long will that triad of power last? And Daniel tells us they won't last long. So there's one very obvious implication to this. We need to understand that kings and kingdoms, powers and authorities, presidents, prime ministers don't last very long. And one thing for us to take hold of in that is, if your preferred power is in charge at the moment, don't get too comfortable. But if you're not a fan of whoever's in power at the moment, don't fret too much. So since Donald Trump has just been elected this week, if you think Donald Trump is a disaster for global politics, don't fret too much. Trump won't last too long in the grand scheme of things. But if, on the other hand, you think Donald Trump is the answer to all of the world's problems, well, don't hang your hopes too strongly on him, because he won't last too long in the grand scheme of things. And likewise, we can say the same for our own country. We can say the same for Keir Starmer, or for Kemi Badenoch, or for Eluned Morgan, or for anyone else in any other country. Some of you are from other countries, and you know of those who are in power in your country. Well, the leaders in those countries won't last too long. Likewise, for whatever tech company is dominant, it seems to me that power isn't primarily just located in those in positions of authority like presidents and kings and queens, but in tech companies. They have control over the majority of our lives. But likewise, for these tech companies, they don't last long. For influencers, celebrities, they don't last long. Whether for good or for bad, they come, they go. So that's one obvious implication from this, is that none of them last. The other implication for us is that we need to make sure we're part of something that does last. You see, unlike the shifting human powers that we have in our world, Jesus is the one outlasting constant. Having accomplished our salvation through dying and rising again, he has ascended into heaven, taken his seat on the throne in heaven, and he has been given all power and all authority over the whole world. And his kingdom is an eternal kingdom. It's a kingdom that is not just going to fizzle out one day. It is not a kingdom that will be conquered. Do you remember BlackBerry phones? I used to have one of those 12 years ago. The first BlackBerry phone, it came out in 2002, right at the time when mobile phones were becoming quite popular, when smartphones were becoming popular. In 2009, around half of the mobile phones in America, or cell phones as they call them, they were BlackBerries. Half of the market was BlackBerry. Yet by 2018, they had released their last ever mobile phone. And all support ended for BlackBerries in 2022. If you have one, you may have noticed that it stopped working that day. So just 20 years after their first smartphone, BlackBerry pulled the final plug on their smartphones. Now, if you knew that BlackBerry phones would have such a short lifespan, you probably wouldn't want a job with BlackBerry. You wouldn't want to be an investor in BlackBerry, or at least you'd pull out early, wouldn't you? You'd probably be less inclined to buy one of their phones if you knew that they weren't going to last much longer. Because if something is only going to be short-lived, you're less likely to want to be a part of it in that kind of scenario. But if Jesus, unlike BlackBerries, will last forever, then maybe he's worth being a part of. But it's not just about the length of his rule. There's more to it than just being the last man standing, isn't there? It's not just that Jesus is the only remaining option and that he's worthy of our following and our worship because he's going to be around the longest. It's not just about that. It's because he is simply better. And let's get back to the vision, and eventually we'll see that. So we left this goat with 4 horns having conquered the world. And then verse 9 continues the vision. Out of one of those horns comes this other horn that starts off small, but it grows. This horn is pretty much universally agreed to be Antiochus Epiphanes. And he's the guy that Jonathan mentioned last week. He ruled one of these 4 segments of the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire. And he ruled from 175 BC to 165 BC. And the section of the empire that he ruled included the land of Israel, the city of Jerusalem. And he was not great. What's so bad about him? Well, look at the way Daniel's vision foretells him 200 years before he was even born, roughly. So verse 10, he's the little horn, remember. Verse 10, it, which is the horn, grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. It, the horn, set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. Now, that might sound a little familiar to you if you know the origin story of the devil. And there are clear parallels being drawn there in this apocalyptic language that it's using there, this kind of poetic type language. So just as the devil set himself up against God, trying to take God's place, so does this Greek ruler. Just as the devil took some of God's heavenly host, the angels, and brought them down in rebellion against God, leading for them to be thrown out of heaven, that's how Antiochus is described here in leading this rebellion against God. So he is filling the devil's shoes. He is literally the devil's advocate in that sense. He was, in fact, the first king to declare himself to be in some way divine or godlike, the first king of this empire anyway. He declared himself to be God, which was in defiance of the one true God. And then verse 11 gives us a bit more details of what he does. So the horn set itself up to be as great as the commander of the Lord's army of the Lord. The horn, took away the daily sacrifice of the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to the horn, and it prospered in everything it did. Truth itself thrown to the ground. And here's what Antiochus did in order to fulfill that. He opposed the worship God's people carried out. He opposed all of the Jewish laws. He banned following any of the Jewish laws, including circumcision. He banned sacrifice at the temple. But he's just getting started. He then went on to commit this act that is referred to in verse 13 with this phrase, this rebellion that causes desolation. It's a phrase that's picked up in the rest of the Bible as well, the abomination that causes desolation. And on one occasion, here's what Antiochus did. He went into the most holy parts of the temple, into the holy place of the temple, and he did so with an idol of Zeus that people were to worship. So in the place of the one true God, he took one of the Greek gods into the holy place. It gets worse. He had a sacrifice of an animal to Zeus in the holy parts of the Jewish temple. He sacrificed an animal to Zeus. And it gets worse. Not just any animal, but a pig. Which, if you know what the Jewish people's laws are, they wouldn't even touch a pig without having to go through washing regimes. They certainly wouldn't eat a pig. And it gets worse. He got the high priest himself, forced him to eat the pig's flesh. So in this one act, Antiochus committed this great blasphemy, defying God, defying the place of worship. And then he went on to persecute God's people for a long time. He violently killed many of them. He enslaved a large number of them. And as the end of verse 13 puts it, he tramples God's people underfoot. So here truly is a wicked king, an evil ruler. So when such evil rulers rise up, is that just the end of it? Are we all doomed? Well, our second key in this is that Jesus will overcome all evil rulers. Notice two things here. First, there's a time limit to his wickedness. Verse 14 gives us a time limit, 2,300 evenings and mornings, which seems to me refers to the evening and morning sacrifices that should have taken place during this time. So half the number of days, 1,150 days, that's roughly 3 years, which is roughly the time period between the desecration of the temple and the time when it was reconsecrated by this group called the Maccabees that you may have heard of. But the point for us is this, that God marks days and times. Evil is not given a free rein. Just as all human powers don't last forever, so God has numbered the days of those that are evil within that number. He is sovereignly even over the evil that is exercised in our world. Think of evil as being like a big scary dog. It is scary, and if it was let loose, it would cause some serious damage. But the dog is on a leash, and not just any leash. The dog is on a strong chain that cannot be broken. That's the sovereignty that God has over evil. Evil genuinely is scary and concerning, but God has evil on a chain that cannot be broken. He has numbered evil's days. So there's a time limit that we need to notice. The second thing we need to notice in this is who brings evil rulers to an end. And for that we have the very last line of verse 25. He, Antiochus, will be destroyed, but not by human power. If it's not human power that destroys Antiochus, then what power is it? Well, it's God's himself. He is the one who judges evil powers, authorities, rulers, and brings them to an end. So the same year that the temple was rededicated to the Lord, Antiochus died. And he didn't die by the Jewish rebellion led by the Maccabees. He didn't die by some other global ruler. He died by an illness involving worms and rotting flesh. I won't say any more than that. For all evil rulers, God has limited their time, and he will hold them to account. The implication for us is to understand that not only that evil rulers will not last forever, but God will hold them accountable. God will weigh up everything they have done wrong. And around the world, there are Christians who are suffering in horrific ways at the hands of evil rulers. Christians who are being persecuted. And what a comfort it is for them to know that God has numbered their days, and God will hold them to account, those that are persecuting believers around the world. So for evil rulers, for any ways in which they have failed to maintain justice and show mercy, God will judge them. For any ways in which they have persecuted God's people and defied God himself, he will judge them. And that's because God has set a day when Jesus will return and when he will judge all. Not just evil rulers, not just human powers, but all people, from royalty to paupers and everyone in the middle. All of us will have to give an account to God for what we have done with our lives. How then do we ensure that we're on the right side of God's judgment? The answer is in the counterpart, the evil rulers, the one who lives forever, the one who is not evil but who is absolute goodness. The answer is King Jesus. You see, he is not simply the one that will outlast the others and therefore we may as well follow him, but he is the best ruler that there ever could be. Because all other rulers will fail at some time, at some point, but Jesus will never fail. Evil rulers will commit horrific injustices sometimes, but Jesus is full of mercy and goodness and always does what is right, and not just when eyes are on him, but all of the time. And more than that, he has made a way by which we can be declared not guilty on the day when judgment happens. And that's by being in Jesus and by being one of his followers, by being part of Jesus' kingdom. We can have that declaration over us of not guilty. He has taken the judgment that is deserved by us, paying for it on the cross so that we don't have to pay for it ourselves. He takes our sin. He pays what it costs. And more than that, he hands us his own perfect life as if it were our own. His life becomes our life. His perfection becomes our perfection. Which means on the day when judgment happens, God will look on us, if we are in Jesus, and see us as if we were Jesus. With all of his goodness and perfectness and righteousness, we will be seen like that, even though we know that we're not. And God will welcome us as he welcomes his own Son, if we are in Jesus. So look, as the world empires change and fall, elections, leaders, dictators, wars, don't fret. Look to God's sovereignty over it all and ensure that you are part of the empire that will outlast them all. The empire that doesn't defy God but loves God and follows his ways. Be a part of Jesus. Be under his love rather than under his judgment.